That's in full screen
Great.
now. Perfect.
Thanks. Okay. So my name is Yuri. I work for the International Civil Aviation Organization. We're part of the United Nations system, and really we're the global meeting point for all things related to aviation regulation, and also then all things related to aviation. It really is a complicated, not complicated, but I wouldn't want to put you to sleep explaining what we are, but one thing that we do try to do is to harmonize all the different regulatory approaches there are across the world that aim to protect the public interests of safety, security, environmental protection, and other things, so that when people design aircraft, fly aircraft, operate aircraft, they're doing it to one set of harmonized rules. Innovation is a very large disruptor right now in our sector, and it is actually starting to allow us to be more aggressive and ambitious in terms of meeting certain objectives that we have. Of course, aviation is a very safe and efficient system and secure as well, but I think there are some things that we could do better, and not the least of which is to make sure that as many people out there in the world are benefiting from aviation to the extent possible. So we have been developing for about a year now a workshop that brings together the innovator, the regulator, and the academia. And I think the purpose or the genesis of all that is because in the 1990s, there was a huge influx of innovation that was probably unleashed because some top level numbers were just coming online. So the human population, of course, was growing. The educational level of the population was growing. Computers and access to information was growing. Well, computer was becoming more accessible. Then we also had other key milestones reached about batteries, about 3D printing. So innovation has become now this very large factory for the future of for the world. And then they started doing aviation as well, mainly in drones, but not only drones. And now every time there is a problem, a societal problem, there's a lot of innovation that's built around it. I think we've seen that in the current crisis on the pandemic, where a lot of the companies out there, whoever they were supplying with, the aviation business or other businesses, started pivoting towards the healthcare protection and all of that. So they were innovating quite a bit in that direction. So why do we need to bring these communities together? Because in aviation, to a certain degree, I think everywhere else the same, there's been a relatively intricate system built up for people who know the sector to meet each other, to share things, and to bring the common goals forward. But now there are a lot of people outside of this sector. People are building drones that are not the major aviation manufacturing companies, for example. And they have a product that will give value to the community. And we now need to enable that increase in the number of people that are involved in all this to better understand how they can work together to achieve it. Probably one of the biggest issues on the innovative side is that they're new to regulation in aviation. They're not quite sure why it's being regulated the way it is. And they may have heard stories about how archaic it is. I'm not saying it's archaic, but people may have heard stories. Then over on the regulatory side, these are new technologies. These are new approaches to using technologies, and they do not necessarily fit in the same kind of framework. So we need to bring the people together, have them feel each other's headaches, if I could say it that way, and then to come up with the common solution. So we give a 4-day workshop on that general topic, and for this this group, this opportunity, I wanted to just go over what's really the core, the first module of our workshop, to maybe have a good dialogue about how we could use this kind of model in innovation in general, not just in aviation. When we give the workshop, it is meant to simulate dialogue, and it is to have a inclusive, an all-inclusive group of people who represent their different skills and different experience and different roles. So, when we do it, we try to make sure that we don't just have a room full of regulators, a room full of industry, but we have this, a third probably should be from the industry, a third from regulators, a third from academia. I was saying about academia, and we'll get to this a little bit more in detail later, but academia plays a very important role because when you have regulators who have the charge of the public to protect their interests, right? This is a role the regulator cannot defer to someone else. And so the regulator needs to protect the public interest so the public has trust that the innovation will be held to the same values of the society that they live in. So we see that now, for example, the data protection. But the regulator itself is not going to always understand the technology, and more will not understand the technology, just cannot keep pace. And so the academia is the one who provides that scientific-based information or the science to make the informed decision. We see that today during the pandemic. Oftentimes, the regulator will be standing next to a scientist, usually a doctor, and then they would be able to maintain the public confidence together that whatever measures need to be taking place. Sometimes, of course, not so popular, that there is some confidence in what is being said. When we do this in a 4-day session, there are interactive sessions and group exercises. We won't be doing the exercise today, but we will be trying to do some polls, which, because we're only a few people here, I think we can do as a discussion rather than a real poll. This is just more for aviation internal purposes, but we focus our workshop mainly on the safety and what we call the air navigation side. This is the technical side of aviation. We do not delve too much into the innovations around these other areas, security facilitation, economic development. Environment, of course, is a benefit of many of the technical areas, but there, as a program, we don't discuss it. So it's kind of a little disclaimer that we give. Okay, so in this module, we want to explore the concept of innovation, examine why ideas, how they come to being, understand the ecosystem, who's who in the ecosystem, and then put that in the context of all this future that's coming ahead of us. So if we were a larger group, I would run a survey at this stage, but I would like to pause here for this moment. And I think since we're not that many, we can ask everyone to introduce themselves. And the question that we would be asking, so if this was a larger group, would ask for people to write down 3 adjectives come to mind when you think of the word innovation. But I think we could just have each person take the floor and introduce themselves real quick, and then just give us 3 adjectives when they introduce themselves. So if that works, I think we can start with, and I'm going to get all of these names wrong, sorry. Kumar, go ahead, please. Introduce yourself and 3 adjectives that you think of when you think of innovation.
Good evening, Yuri and the other members. I think I've been with Yuri in some other session also. I met him. Yeah. So, anyways, I am Divyoti. I am a maker and an educator basically, and working in the space of actually I have like making learning fun basically, and making it accessible to people. Like that's the main thing. And for us, innovation, I think it's about making future happen as fast as possible, I guess. But like you try to see you see like the future is happening, like you think about future, but then again uh, like future is a matter of space and time, like what we basically think about. Some place that the future is already there that we can imagine of, and like in some places like we are yet to be in that position. So innovation has to happen in like all level. And for us, like it will be for us to like find out ways to make those things to be realized faster.
Okay, thank you
I
very
think I gave
much.
a bit more than three words of adjectives. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Um, so I think I'm gonna get this name wrong. Viha. Sorry, or
Shanna.
Shanna. Sorry.
That's okay. I don't know why my middle name's, I have to go in there. My middle name's in there too, but Shanna like banana. So I don't know, I guess just immediately coming to mind would be, new or novel, though not necessarily good. So in my background, I don't know. So I'm on the edge of new things myself and wanting to cultivate new, but qualitatively good and healing, I guess, and supporting well-being. There are a lot of new things that can happen, I guess, that leave us, I don't know, that have bad outcomes, and that are new, or that for whatever reason might need to be regulated differently, or might need to be mitigated. So yeah, so my perspectives, I've been an educator in a very fast shifting environment, raising 6 children ages 16 to 28 now in what has felt like quicksand. And I mean, in a way, in the shifting world of learning and the things that have opened up, as well as things that are quickly becoming sort of obsolete. So, and I've been in an environment where I've seen the tensions between kind of what the regulators' attempts to keep everybody safe in some sense of, continuity, and being perhaps risk averse, and the interrelationships between those things are of interest, because they're patterns that, I mean, are throughout the innovation landscape, I guess. So I'm interested in everything you're going to share with us today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you're an educator.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mount Holyoke, first of my class in high school, in Mount Holyoke, graduate here in Western Mass, and worked for a big consulting firm out of college. And then, sort of jumped the tracks when I started having kids, and had my own little incubator, I guess, of sorts, with 3 little boys that weren't responding to my management techniques. I was getting very immediate and clearly felt feedback loops that continued to dismantle any frameworks I had in my mind of how things should go, which led me to a massive library of, God help me figure this out. And then while pursuing, looking up research that's coming out on how children learn, and, all these things, that there's been amazing research coming out that should have shifted, because we don't have that dynamic environment cultivated, things haven't shifted, right? So we've had great research coming out of Tufts and Harvard and all kinds of places on how kids learn, and the complexity of it, and all the different dimensions of what a child is, and how to tend them with appropriate care and honor, that have not made their way into the, regimented sort of industrial system, except, by exception, maybe. And which brings us to a cataclysmic place right now, because we've failed to adapt, and now things are exponentially moving and shifting. And, we're just, we're just, we're like not ready for what's happening.
Yeah.
Which is why I feel like, I guess my diverse interests, coming from my own path of inquiry and questions, has put me in a place of feeling like I can't not step up into the moment, right? Because you have labored into, I think, getting new frameworks built in your own mind, and experiencing and feeling the relationships between, amidst all the complexities. And this is just a pivot moment right now, across all, I mean, in the whole landscape, which is why, all of these sessions are so salient and so, I don't know, I feel very much sort of in my zone in a way, though I don't have a whole bunch of, PhD letters to put after my name, figuring out the complexities in an environment with 6 children. And I got the blind bag package of like everybody entirely different. Like there were no patterns, like I couldn't group 2 of them together, like nothing. 3 boys, 14 months apart, that were entirely different. And I just thought, how do teachers do it with 30 kids, right? So you've seen how you've looked at it from a lot of different vantage points, right? And also had to kind of go to bat for the kids, even when the regulators are, or those that are responsible and that you're having to report to are saying, oh, your son's, doing Lego Mindstorms robotics at 11. That's not evidence for learning, and you're like, you want me to put an A on it? Like, oh,
Yeah.
like, kind of like you realize all the lack of adaptation that has happened that create now such big chasms between mindsets too, right?
And I think that's, oh, sorry. Yes, I think that's that last part you were mentioning, that's hopefully something we maybe talk about a little bit more later, which is, how are those who are doing the grading? I mean, we're regulators, how are the people who have authority? I mean, it's an interesting word. How are we what are we doing wrong, and how should we do it in a better way?
Yeah.
So thank you. And
how do we open that up? I'm very interested to hear how we open that up, right? How do we open eyes to see how it's such a different environment now, and where can we open up, or where can we create a true, beta place for whoever, if we're able to undertake kind of, let's have freedom to do much more experimentation. What needs to happen to allow for that, so that we can start to evidence what we expect, given the research, will actually manifest, right? It's not like unresearched. We're not going in blind, totally winging it. There's a whole body of research that's been evidenced in a lot of different ways. And how can we make that more visible, I guess, and begin to show that there are pathways forward that will allow for us to, that call us to reconsider these relationships that you're
okay.
Yeah.
I think I might actually segue into a different set of slides at the very end that might talk a little bit to what you just mentioned. So Richard,
hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, good. First thing I want to say, this is great. You really got some little light bulbs popping on and off here in my mind. I'm driving in my car, so if just to be mindful of that. It's all fine. I've got my little headset on and my air conditioning on, so it's just like having a conference call. But I'm not going to be visual here. I was kind of thinking of adjectives, and I had been oddly in the back of my mind when you mentioned that that odd phrase in the U.S. Constitution, "the pursuit of happiness," popped up, to me. And the last speaker, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Shana.
You were talking about freedom. a little bit there towards the end, and that's one of the things that, you know, and I think about innovation, I think about freedom, right? One has to be sufficiently free, right, to, you know, to innovate, not to be boxed in too much. And there is a number of creative and necessary, you know, tensions between the inventing entrepreneurial mindset, if you will, and institutional, you know, structures or boxes that we all have to live in. And I guess, like, children, thinking of children, I don't have any, but I love I love your metaphors when you're talking about your, you know, your kids. Um, Whether they push, how hard they push, or whatever kind of, you know, feedback loops you're in, they need that structure, right? You have to give them that box, otherwise they have nothing to push against. And then more often than not, then they'll become very frightened and they'll withdraw. And that's kind of what kids do. So if they don't have um, um, a structure, you know, around them, it'll be difficult for them to seek their freedom to play and to innovate. And I think we're probably all like that, and it's probably one of the conundrums of you know, of the human experience. So thinking about regulators and regulating, there is a kind of a permanent and necessary tension between the processes of regulation and the processes of invention and innovation.
Mm.
Regulators, you know, might you know, you tend to think of the regulatory community as a somewhat, you know, gray bureaucratic lot, right, with a dreary task to keeping the public face, you know, safe. They're, you know, awfully invested in the precautionary principle, and the last thing you want, you know, unless
No, Richard, I think we lost the audio. Sorry, Richard, I think you may have.
Small experiment or a little, you know, some
So Richard, I think we've lost your audio.
okay.
Maybe you're driving through
Just come back to me if you can hear me. I can hear you all fine.
Okay, now we can kind of hear you again. Maybe
Actually, I just went through a known dead spot between cell towers.
Okay.
It's interesting. I could hear you just fine. So can you hear me again?
Yeah, we can hear you again. Yes.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much bandwidth, so just let me know, right, if you can't hear me, and just move on to somebody else.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, but where I was going with this is sort of like the natural tendencies that we have to, you know, navigate between the need for structure and rules and the need to play, experiment, invent, and innovate. It's a pendulum that swings back and forth. There's never any perfect, you know, solution. Little children, in order to be able to play, they have to feel safe. In order to feel safe, they've got to be regulated, right? They've got to, you know, they have to be in their box. Well, they're going to fight against that box, right? It's what they do. Yeah. And so aren't we all. So when we look at government or public regulations, a lot of us that are in the making community, or however we want to invent or innovate, often then run up against these regulatory, you know, walls and processes. So I was going to say that the processes of regulation and the processes of innovation rub up against each other. There is never any perfect, you know, solution. One example of over regulation, in my view, can be understood through the notion of the precautionary principle and the writings of, I can't remember the Harvard professor who worked for the Obama administration and wrote a very interesting book called The Politics of Fear, and looked at an examination, was an examination of the history and the impact of the precautionary principle and how it emerged, over the years, and had a huge amount of influence on urban planning and environmental regulations, all of which we need. But on the other hand, when we start looking at the impacts of a untenable housing crisis in the United States, and also in some of the other advanced economies, and the levels of regulations that have now been imposed upon the ability to expand housing innovation, you got a real problem out there. And I just sort of mentioned that as one example. I think both, as a society and probably as a regulatory community, the notion of banking innovation might, I would kind of raise the hair on the back of my neck, right? I remember the Canadians saying during the Great Recession, they were having a little bit better of a go of it than the U.S. was at the time, and they were kind of a bit proud of themselves. And they said, "Well, we have a better regulated, financial sector than you guys down there do. We don't like exciting banks. We prefer gray and dull banks. Thank you very much. So we don't have to think about them, right?" And maybe that was a better regulatory, approach, right? And we've been licking our wounds down here pretty much ever since. But we kind of go back to the notion of freedom and independence and the pursuit of happiness. In other words, the ability for somebody to follow their bliss, right?
Yeah.
Innovations and invention come from the heart and soul as much as they do, from the intellectual, mind. And a person frees themselves up. Why on earth would an entrepreneur not put in 100 hours a week, right? Quit his job, right? Sustain a divorce, whatever, in the pursuit of his single-minded passion that may or may not, pan out, right? It's a pursuit of happiness thing. And I'm not saying that can't happen under an over-regulated structure or an authoritarian system. It certainly can. My favorite example of that was was Soviet rocketry. My God, we're still using their boosters. Those things work, right? I mean, it's an amazing story of how the Soviet rocket scientists innovated and experimented and reiterated until they had a booster rocket that just worked, right? Like a Kalashnikov rifle as opposed to our N1. The damn thing just works, right? And so yeah, I'm sorry. Let me just stop there, but I just kind of want to point out that tension, right? That was the thing I wanted to say.
Okay, great. And I think there are already a couple of common things coming up. Kate, do you have any adjectives you would like to share with the group?
Sure. I mean, I work in a fab lab, so I would go with new. I would go with something along the lines of, risky. And maybe the third one would be around creativity. Something to do with, creativity.
Okay. And I think it's going to be no surprise that when we do this with the larger groups, we get very diverse set of adjectives that are really driven by whatever is in the mind. Some on one side who are risk averse will use sometimes a little more negative terms, and then others will use positive terms, and then yet others have three terms that kind of try to balance each other out. We heard a little bit of that here, where let them be free and think what they want to and do what they want to, but make sure that they're they're in a box. I think what I've been when I've been engaged in these conversations, and this week also, I think I was on a panel 2 days ago, and there were a couple of things that came up a little bit which I thought were interesting. One is that people keep on talking about the youth, and the youth is coming up with innovation. The youth is personally, I mean, I'm 50, so I don't think youth is aligned so much as it is a driver for innovation or creativity, whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting to me that when you may have a youth, a kid who's being shown all this technology and is great in innovating that technology, is free to think about how they want to use that technology to all sorts of things. But we're not necessarily also taking that step at the same time to let them innovate in a safe space that has values that we as a society, want to keep as our values. So in aviation, it's safe, right? So we would go to a drone maker fair, and we would try to challenge them on the word of safety as much as on the other things they're looking to do, like faster, higher, whatever. But I think probably my biggest takeaway till now from this week has been that we need to get some people who are not youth anymore or don't consider themselves youth anymore to be kids again. And I find it interesting that there are these ideas for adults now, like sandbox and playgrounds, gamification. You see it in the screen behind me, right? We publish comic books now to tell adults why we should have innovation. It's interesting that we can wake that up a little bit. So I'm going to go through some slides, and sorry, Richard, that I'm not able to bore you through the visual presentation here, but you're not missing anything. It's mainly text on slides. So we do talk about innovation, about it being novel. It's just a concept. It's also a technology. It's also a process. It's also a way of thinking. It's all these things. And I think the moment you define innovation, you define what it's not, and somebody will prove to you that the very thing you thought it wasn't is also innovation. And it's something that we need to struggle with in the aviation community, because the aviation community is driven by definitions. But how do you make people comfortable to talk about innovation without giving them a definition? And there are some clarity that's coming through the innovation community, though, where it seems to be happening. I think the other day in one of the panels I was, somebody had mentioned that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And we also had a conversation that, it's not necessarily inclusive. So when we do have conversations about the future, we should take attendance of the people who are not in the room and try to understand why the people who are not in the room, and what can we do to bring the message to them, or to bring them into the message. And that's the inherent part of innovation that I think makes it always a modern term. I don't think the word innovation is ever going to sound like it's old-fashioned. And when we talk about the use of the thing that's being innovated, while it's not necessarily what the innovator was thinking to do with it, it definitely is one of the better ways to communicate that idea with all the people who are going to have to do something with it, whether it's the bank that's going to invest, or the regulator that's going to have to find a way to accept it, or the public, right, that's going to be the customers of it. And I think again, in a separate conversation I was in the other day and during this week, somebody did mention that, is there a way to let innovators innovate and let them build what they're going to build, but not, and then let them make that available to the community without requiring a business case, without requiring, too many regulations per se, right? Just because, that might stop a good idea from ever becoming, getting to market. And by market, I mean, being made available to people who can then take the benefit out of it. So when we bring ideas into reality, these ideas solve problems, they satisfy a need, or it's just pure creativity. I think for those of us who can remember, I think everybody on the call except maybe Kumar can remember, in the 1990s, there was a tech bubble. There was a lot of innovation. There were a lot of new websites. There were a lot of new things. But then suddenly it all came crashing down because no one could monetize any of it. And I think it was interesting to see that that was what was holding things back, the question of whether you could monetize. A lot of these were pure creativity. And I think what we're experiencing now, which is 20 years later in the maker community, coming up with creative, we don't stop someone from being creative because they cannot figure a way how to monetize what they're working on. And I think that's where, also from a regulatory perspective, we need to pay attention to the things that may not originally seem to have an intrinsic value to society. Of course, creativity has that, but I mean, from a regulatory perspective. And I think we're really in a society with a history as a human race where we keep on hearing that, you know, you hear the story of duct tape and, oh, well, that's not what it was originally designed for. You hear the story about nylon and, well, that's not what it was originally designed for. So it seems that the creativity is actually the most important part of this equation, not the usefulness of something. So there's this next survey we would have done as a group, and I do apologize for the sudden change of the slide design, but this wasn't meant to be shown this way. But so if you had to describe how you feel when you see a good idea to a Martian, what words would you use? Like how would you describe to someone out of this world, so someone who doesn't what you feel when you see a good idea? And I do want to maybe touch a little bit on, I think, what some of you have said, or at least it jives with a little bit what the discussion has been going on. Innovation, in a way, at least for me, I'm involved in innovation within a regulator. And my primary purpose of being involved in innovation is that I really feel the positivity around it. It's making people have fun at work again. It's making people have fun at doing things again. And so, if somebody's writing a regulatory piece that is working on a bolt on, something mechanical, that's not so exciting. But when you talk about innovation and show that they can also innovate how they're writing that piece and how they're talking about the bolt, that seems to wake up something that maybe was taken away from them ever since they were a child, let me say it this way. And and now they're able to understand how to have fun and excitement at their workplace, doing what they're doing. And so for me, if I had to explain a good idea how I feel when when I see a good idea from a visitor from Mars, my first thought is it's something that I wish I had thought of. I wish that it was thought of earlier. That it's something that we wanted to have had earlier in it. So a difficult question, I know, but please feel free to be creative and innovative when you respond. Maybe we can start with Shanna.
Okay, so the exercise is, you're from Mars and I just saw something amazing and I'm trying to explain to you my experience of.
Yeah, you're feeling what it.
I'd probably pick some emojis, I feel
yes.
like, I feel like so often, like sometimes, I don't know, it might sound strange, but like, I almost feel like in today's liminal sort of transitional place that sometimes those images serve better than words that sometimes are laden with their own baggage, sort of, that somehow it feels more true to share an image in a way, or less less interference. I don't know. You know, words can be touchy today,
Yes.
right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the divisiveness we see everywhere, and you like see how what they're carrying in is part of what's, you know, kind of muddying all the everything, whatever their experience might have been, or whatever baggage is on a certain word. So
And I think
maybe feel my energy
Mhm.
around the kind of hopefulness of, you know what I mean? This kind of like, I don't know, joy and an emoji or two, and like,
Yeah.
hey, you know, good things ahead, like great things for you and me. And we just met, but it's gonna be fabulous. You know, I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Thank
My
you.
disposition a little bit in there.
Kate, you want to have a go at a question?
Yes. Let me just well, I think it's really funny when you say here the wait, do you even speak English? I think I'd be more on that that side of things. But yeah, I think what Shannon was saying about, you know, this kind of like trying to put into whatever I'm describing also the energy, like describe it also through the way that I tell them about what it is. I think this is super interesting because, yeah, describing how you feel is something that is quite difficult to do. So I think I would try and do that through my body language or through the way that I explain it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Richard, I don't know if you got the question while you're driving, but maybe you've been able to infer from the discussion. But if you would like to attempt to answer, please go ahead. I think Richard's mic is not on. Oh, now it is. Yes. Go ahead, Richard. Oh, sorry, Richard. I think we're not hearing you quite well again.
Yeah, it is to intervene. And actually, I write. Oh, let's see. Testing 1, 2, 3. I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you about 4 and 5. Yeah.
All right. I'm just stepped outside. I'm at a place called Skagit Building Salvage, which is a fabulous place for somebody who likes to tinker, like like me. So, can you remind me of the basic question here?
So, if you see a good idea, you know, how would you describe how you feel when you see a good idea?
The fellow from Mars. Okay.
Yes, the fellow from
Got
Mars.
it. Okay. I think one of the first things I would ask is like, wow, how does that work? Right. Right. You know, can I fiddle with that? I think, why didn't I think of that? Probably would not be the first thing that comes, to mind, but from a sense of feeling, it's like that old joke with the two, English, 19th century English, professors or scientists, or, like, brilliant, I say, brilliant. I mean, that would sort of be my, my attitude. I'd want to clap the fellow on his back and congratulate him, right? That would be kind of like my first reaction.
Okay. Thank you. And
I'm gonna go on. I'll go on mute again.
Oh, okay, no problem. So Kumar, you've had the most time to think about this.
Yeah.
But it is also what, 1 o'clock in the morning for you? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like 12:30 around. Like for me, like it would be always like it can be either magic, like the innovation might be either magic or something like which will definitely blow my mind, like I guess, right? Like
Yeah.
if it's a magic, because like if what I feel like innovation again, it like it has a different place, right? For us, to be in a place in this place and like having an innovation which helps us to get maybe like some like if there is a process, right? So we need innovation is also like process innovation is also is a part of the process, right? So I think I will definitely like to try to see like those innovation in the process happening, like more in for at least for us, so that things start happening. Like you like we need like all those other problems like in terms of like infrastructure for education or even healthcare. So something is not working out, and like so that means that there is a problem with the process, and like innovation in those processes, I think like will like maybe like in terms of maybe like it might be some devices, it can be some sort of a way where like these things are happening more faster. But then again, like I think it will be relief, I guess, like what I will feel like if it really solves the problem, I think I will be very like a sense of like joy, but like then again sense of like a sort of a like relief. I think I should go with relief, like that thing happened, like it
Yeah.
made the things better. I think that's what I would feel.
Yeah, thank you. So there are no right answers to these questions, of course, but I'll give I'll just give what my input is. So one thing is that it's something that's indescribable, and I think many of you were talking about how it's difficult, and it kind of is indescribable in a way. When when I follow innovation, I am waiting for those moments where I see something that just makes me feel in a very positive way, but I wouldn't be able to describe that necessarily to other people. That might just be my deficiency in language, but I hope it's not. The other thing is, I think we've been in this situation, right? So some of you have kids, and we all have been kids. And when a kid tries to explain to its parents why it's so excited about something, and the parents just someone from Mars, right? Just not really understanding why this kid is so excited about what he's excited about. And I think innovators coming into the regulatory field, sometimes I think that's kind of how they feel. Why does this regulator from Mars not understand that he should just let me do what I'm trying to do because it's going to help all these people in the world? And there are going to be a lot of times when our communication between the different people involved in bringing these ideas to society, allowing to benefit society, there is just it's not a communication problem more than it is being able to get someone else to feel what you're feeling, whether it is the innovator trying to get the excitement to the regulator, or the regulator trying to get the innovator to calm down and start thinking through some of these more intricate things. Of course, the academia always provides, at least in my mind, the type of referee between these different things. The word balance is often used, but I don't see it so much as a balance, because everything's working towards the same goal, right? But again, we're trying to expose through this survey or through this question that sometimes it's going to be difficult to share, to have common emotion, common vision on some areas. Now, good ideas. This slide talks to some traits. You do trial and error. You have validation by users. There's a high degree of transparency and a high degree of creative freedom. This is not, of course, an exclusive list. There are many other things that could be on here. But when we talk between the regulator and the innovator and the academia, it's very it facilitates the discussion when they can say, okay, well, when we look at the trial and error process, how do you know that you have a better product afterwards, and who are the users of this product, and how are they validating this? I think some of this comes from research that the team has done that put this workshop together in the area of software. I think most of us have experience that maybe we were given a software where, you know, we're thinking, who were the testers of the software and why did they ever think this was a good way to do it? And others who seem to get it right all the time, and then yet others who are doing it in such a way that, you know, we change our behavior to fit this new user interface. This is now, you know, common throughout innovations, and we need to understand that everything that's innovated is used by somebody. And so this is, you know, a good idea is not just a good idea, it's also a good way to present that idea, a good way to implement that idea. So ideas must make sense. They must be grounded in some reality or address some demand, except for those that are purely there for creativity, of course. If its usefulness, it needs to be elaborated through through some sort of thought process, and this is important for people to know, for the regulators mainly, I would say, and the academia to know how how an idea had matured through a self-improvement process. Because a lot of times people will come out with an idea or an innovation out of, you know, their garage or wherever it is and say, this is, you know, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And then the regulators would have to relearn some of the errors that were made in getting to that stage, because they would have similar questions like, why didn't you use this or why didn't you do that? Social acceptance, I think, is now front and center in many of these things, especially in the aviation and high technology areas. Also, with the experience that we've been having recently with, you know, with the pandemic, where it's not that any group, innovators, regulators, or academia can decide for the society, and that the society will just accept it, right? So there's got to be a lot of effort put into making these things, getting the society to understand what they are, what they don't do, what they do. When you have teams that are diverse and inclusive, that is a baseline, let me say this way, a baseline variable that helps with making good ideas. I think it's been shown time and time again that the more voices in the room, the more experiences in the room, the better idea that will come out. So these slides, of course, are for aviation. So we have the part that it's certifiable in aviation. That's relatively important, because the certificate gives confidence, and then you can take that confidence to any other part of the world. And so if you fly a drone and you know that your local regulator has said it's not, you know, it's safe and it's not taking pictures and it's not sending data to people who shouldn't have it, then you can take that certificate and you know, and go to another part of the world and transfer that confidence with it. So we looked at many different models. We have the 6 stages of scaling innovation, which is from the ideation to the research and development, proof of concept, transition to scale, scaling, and sustainable scale. I'm sure many of you are better read than I am in these areas. This is not meant to impose on anyone that this is the way to do it and there's no other way. I think the processes of innovation itself are being innovated, and they've got to be open to that kind of fast prototyping, so that we can enable the best ideas, or actually the worst ideas, to drop off first, you know, the quickest. So what does that mean for our workshop when we bring together the regulator, the academia, and the innovator, is that you cannot have a process that takes a long time because the ball is being passed from one of those to the other, right? So the innovator passes the ball, regulator saying, here's my new prototype. And the regulator goes to the academia and says, okay, can you take a look at this and tell me whether it, you know, it's compliant with all the values of society, and then they come back with a report and then they try to make it better. That process takes too long and also requires a lot of energy. What's more important is that the people who represent the interests, whether it's the regulatory interests or the research interests or the innovator interests, are in the conversation and in the room every step of the way. There should be no exclusivity in that process if you want to have a high degree of iteration that gets you to the end goal. And so whichever architecture you take for scaling innovation, that's already being done, I would say, in some countries of the world when it comes to investment in innovation. So they already have the investment community picking up ideas and then incubating them. And so we'll get to innovation incubators in a moment, but again, you probably know more about them than I do. But just wanted to now talk about the innovation ecosystem. So without defining ecosystem, but basically it's just there are a lot of species in it, and they all somehow respond to the environmental inputs to that ecosystem, of course. But the questions that I want to ask next are as follows. So can you name someone who should never be involved in innovation? And it's a yes/no question. So you don't have to point anyone out, because some people might be shy that they can think of someone who shouldn't be involved, but they don't want to say it out loud. And then what's missing in the current innovation ecosystem? So if you think of us trying to become better at innovation, is there a specific resources missing? Is funding missing? Is creativity missing? Are we missing problems that people should solve? Or are we missing more workshops like these? And then the last question is about innovators in spare time. So the question is, how much of an innovator's spare time is spent on innovation? And that last question is a little bit of an outlier in this set, but I'll explain why we asked that question after everybody gives the answers. So maybe we'll just go around the other way this time and start with Kumar.
Yeah. So, like, I think innovation should, like, everyone should be involved in innovation. Like everyone is involved in innovation in one way or the other. But then again, like, I work with I work at the innovation hub. So it's funded by government. So they have this they have a 3D printer like that they can run for the. There's a public space like public museum like where they have an innovation hub with all the like tools. So what I noticed over there, what was happening is that like people come up with a project, and that is again approved, like it should that be allowed to be printed or not, like, right? So there is a process of like approval for getting a project actually uh, that the project can be done or not, can be printed or not. So I guess like those, like, because we have public spaces, right? And those public spaces are run by, like, we have government people over there, like the bureaucracy, or like, I don't know, like maybe funding issues. And when they stop those kind of, because it's a public space, people believe that they can go and do something over there, right? And when those public spaces do not support those kind of ideas, like maybe like that particular person, like who I saw like getting rejected, like that his particular project will not be funded by the, I guess those are the points where like things go haywire, like you lose out a lot of like ideas, like I call it brain drain. So you have like these incredible people with ideas, but then again, because they don't have the opportunity or access to tools, like uh, they don't get to the other side of like the next step. Like you have they go to the ideation, they make the thing, now they want to like maybe like they design it, then they want to have a physical thing that has to be made. And for us, like when you talk about of a ecosystem, like a place where you can make your idea to a reality, like a fab lab or a space maker space, like those kind of plays a very vital role, because you need to go and like test out your idea. Like it will be very difficult for everyone to just like get in all the tools or buy the tools and like start making their own thing. Like So I guess, yeah, those are like some of the issues. Along with that, awareness, like I heard this term called innovation literacy, right? How to innovate, like that's what they tell about, like, like we have digital literacy where you like learn how to learn about like go into a digital world. And then there's word called innovation literacy, where you learn how to like innovate things, like, and the first step, I guess, it should be always about like building confidence in the people, that they can make things with their hand, right? Once you have a confidence, once you know how to make things, I think surely he like that person will go to innovate, right? Like, without, if you don't have that confidence to make anything, I think it will be very hard to innovate something. So yes, so, and like as an innovator space, like for the last part, like how much of an innovator's spare time is spent on innovation, I guess is all the time, I guess. Like it might be a physical building space, but I think in his mind, like it will be always like drawing up ideas, like, and like the mental exercise keeps on happening, like, right? And that is also a pure part of the process of innovation. Like like innovation doesn't only happen on a piece of paper. Like sometimes it happens in your head, and like you're trying to go like think about all these different like things like which might like change your perspective regarding a problem that you have been thinking about, right? So yes, and also like the innovation also, I think, is very uh, geographical, right? Like some innovation that is happening in another country, like I might say, okay, that's a good thing, but like it's not helping my community, it's not helping us. Like, why should I be bothered about that innovation, right? Like, it's not helping. So you have this life-saving straw, right? I heard about this innovation, like that's a very like that was used in Africa, like for portable drinking water. But like those things are not in my space. Like, why I should cheer about those ideas, right? Why I should be happy about that thing being made if my people are not getting those things like at the cost-effective price. So those are my questions, and like those are my challenges actually. Like what I feel like that has to be solved. Like when you talk about innovation for humanity, it should like reflect that, okay, every like human on earth can have the access to that technology. Then it's more meaningful to me, I believe. It's more valuable than just the particular location. And
Okay, thank you.
I think that the regulators come, the role of the regulators come, I think, in those points where you can like design things, and like that we are talking about, like, right, distributed networking, where you are making things in their own location, like localized making production to cut down the cost. I think those are the things that will come into play and like will help change the things. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Kate, if you'd like a attempt at these questions.
Sorry, I was talking with my
It's all right.
Yeah, so first one, I think the answer is definitely no. I don't think there's anyone who should never be involved. That's for me very clear. I think what's missing in the current innovation ecosystem is actually the connections or conversations, or in some way the synergies between the different actors. So maybe it's actually speaking to the first one, in that maybe there's some people who are not involved that should be involved currently. And then finally, how much of an innovator's spare time is spent on innovation? I don't know if this is a trick question, in that an innovator innovates and during their time they innovate and their spare time is spent doing something else. But yeah, I think also there, like, the idea of innovation is kind of part of who you are as a person. I don't know if that's the correct answer, but maybe, an innovator is always innovating would be my answer.
There are no wrong answers.
Right. Okay. Well, in that case, that's my answer.
or is it the glass half full? There are no right answers? I'm not sure.
Exactly.
Thanks. Richard, please. Oh, and we can see you now. How are you doing? But we cannot hear you.
Okay.
Now we can hear
there
you.
we are. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Thank you. I can see everybody now. Hi, and hopefully you can see me, and I can see the screen. And I took down some notes, so hopefully I can be a little bit more succinct. This is an interesting conversation. Thank you. Who shouldn't do this? You know, and the thing that just occurred to me, you know, was folks that are just evil. um, lack of empathy is then what kind of came up, you know, for me. And so one of the things that's missing or needed. This has been a long time problem or issue in the engineering, fields. It's almost a joke, like Gilbert cartoons, and it's sort of the need for socio-emotional learning to accompany technical and engineering learning. And this is more of an issue with the global education, you know, system than it is with, you know, individual, you know, character and such. But when people kind of get tracked off in different areas, you know, like when I was in high school, I got tracked off into the college prep, you know, English, you know, humanities. I was actively discouraged from getting into shop classes and, things like that. I feel like I've been trying to, cure that, you know, for most of my, you know, adult life. So it was a lack of balance. But on the other hand, the other problem can be somebody can grow up in an educational environment that's purely engineering and technical and such like that, and you know, never get a chance to read the classics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the field of socio-emotional learning has got to be integrated more tightly into curriculum with technical and vocational instruction, and then also carry that off into higher learning. Sergey Brin, Google, those guys, when they first founded Google, one of their core principles was first do no evil. And this becomes increasingly difficult as innovations go to scale, right? And everyone can see that being that tension being played out within Google and and Facebook. This is also where the regulatory community is really important. So when some of these innovations, Steve Jobs, the same thing. They had, I think, very genuine humanistic goals, right? But as the enterprises grow to massive, you know, scale, it's almost inevitable that they become too big to care. And they begin to lose sight of the social impact of what they're doing. What's missing? I think I addressed that. How much of an innovator spare time? We can go too far. I think I mentioned, you know, pursuing one's bliss doesn't mean you have to be, in your workshop for 100 hours, you know, a week and neglect your, stop taking showers and neglecting, you know, your children. So I think life balance, maybe that kind of comes back to socio-emotional learning again. But I mean, we have to be able to take care of ourselves in order to properly, you know, innovate, I think. And it becomes easy. And I've certainly had spells of my time where I just let myself get buried, you know, in the work. So not only was it fulfilling, but I let it become all consuming. I see that playing itself out in maker spaces, you know, all the time. So I mean, so I don't know. Pick up a hobby, go play golf, and make an effort to befriend new people. There has to be life balance. So those would be the empathy, socio-emotional learning, and also I would say access to second stage capital. That's another thing that's missing here, because you get a lot of great ideas that can kind of prove out in small scale in the lab, and then they just die on the vine. This is particularly an issue in minority and underserved communities that simply do not have access to the systems of capitalization through systemic racism, etc. Third world, first world, dilemmas. And so the world is missing a lot of really excellent products and services that can be addressing a lot of issues in the world, but for, right, access to reasonable tranches of second stage capital. The impact hubs, the network of impact hubs is a really good experiment out there to try to address that. The one in Seattle, for example, is in a big old building, and they've got all the working spaces and little offices that you can rent. But there's also venture capitalists, right, that have their offices right in the same complex of buildings, and they make sure that they have seminars, they can make appointments, they can help people think through their business plans, all that kind of stuff, and help lead them to and make introductions to that kind of second stage capital. And there's that, I think that's a really good model to look at.
Okay,
anyway, that's it for me.
thank you. Shanna, please.
So many valuable reflections already brought up. I mean, just thinking about the people that are left out, that more people that should be present for innovation, the appropriate sensitivities built in, and feedbacks and awarenesses, experience. I mean, all the things that give you the insights, especially, I mean, I hear it, I experience it, maybe even more so since COVID. And, we all are experiencing, I think everybody I've talked to, long waits for customer service, and just go to the chat bot and it's not picking up your question. And you're like, a real person. What I really want is a real person. Like, this is not helping. No, and you're wasting all my time. Premature over automation, perhaps, things like that, that haven't appropriately fine-tuned or aren't appropriately mature yet. And how people haven't picked up on that, I don't know. Or maybe they don't want to hear all the complaints. I guess that's an easy way to automate out the, bad feedback. So yeah, what's missing in the current innovation ecosystem? I mean, one thing that's, and I raised this in another session that was open, that's been on my heart for quite some time, I think, where, when you think about all the noise right now and all the divisiveness and debate, and not to say that those things aren't valuable, but when we think about say all the people that have come to this online summit, and we have in our minds a sense that like there's a new path emerging, right? There's like an emerging frontier and landscape, because we've perhaps surveyed enough to be able to composite something in our minds that says, forward ho, sort of. And I think for me, I've thought, I'd love to begin to work on this in particular, but kind of community envisionarium space, a shared, and this is being talked about already, right? Like shared dashboards, so we can actually know what's going on in our communities, first of all, because even with all this COVID stuff, having kids of various ages even, and they're tuning into Instagram or whatever, I'm like, and they think, they're getting their impressions, and I'm just like, there are a lot of people that are waiting in lines for food today that aren't checking in on Instagram, like we're not really, are we really aware of what's going on in our community, and the felt needs and the real needs and the disparities? The Massachusetts Attorney General website, you go onto their database, it's overloaded with complaints, right? Like it's literally a massive repository of ongoing huge complaints that we don't have the sense making ability to deal with that, for instance, right? And the responsiveness, because some things are just happening so quickly. But for me, I think it's been more, could we create the kind of community envisionarium? You think about, let's say, Pinterest or maybe Instagram in some ways, right? They're images that can evoke a hopefulness about what's ahead, right? And they're images that can evoke a kind of sense of despair and, or customer service experience. Like, if this is where it's going, I'm checking out, going off grid, I'm out of here, like goodbye, all of it, I'm going to live in a tent, and and I honor people who make that choice too, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like we could, as part of this innovation environment, create, I think, more community gathering and communication infrastructure and space, places of building appreciation for all the varied, right? The people who are high tech oriented, the people who don't even really want a flip phone, right? Like, and making room for all of that to happily coexist. And for everybody to feel like they're covered and they're heard and they're listened to and they're not left behind. But just visions around what the, those of us who are more innovation oriented, and we look out there every day and we see all this new stuff, we're like, get at it, right? We're like, let's do this thing, because we can see it, it's like so close we can almost taste it. And other folks are just, maybe by necessity, just head to the ground, can't even look up, maybe weren't oriented that way, or were raised in a totally different environment and can't even imagine. You think about even teachers who are approaching retirement, coming up against kids who, again, just an example from my experience, when 10 years ago, my son, this was before it was a hot thing, Minecraft was just coming in, mom, I'm building a working calculator in Minecraft. You're like, what are you talking about? Okay, I think that sounds like science. Yeah, like, good, go after it. Anyway, so I think that, like, commuting space, this communiversity landscape, like starting to begin to see the richness of the environment that you have, the things that are on the horizon, the good possibility frontiers ahead. And can we convene some way around wanting to navigate beyond where we are that is better for everybody, right? And getting some sense of like hopefulness and consensus around that, enough to build the momentum for the collective yes, right? Can you create a vision that the vast majority will want to say yes to, right? Like, yes, yeah, greater prosperity, yes, good food for everybody, yes, ample opportunity, no one left behind, yes, like, okay, yeah, we're in agreement and all that. How are we going to get there, right? So anyway, a few thoughts. So that and not having it siloed, right? Not having those conversations siloed in the university, siloed in paywall places, siloed or accessed or gated out, where some people are just gated out for one reason or another. And how much of an innovator space is spent, I think our imagination zone is, even from my own experience, like there is a time when you go, okay, help me not to just constantly be thinking about all that's ahead that could be so dramatically better for so many people, right? Like, how do you turn that off? Like, how do you turn that off? I mean, once you've gotten in your mind that like, oh my gosh, we can make these massive strides in the next 5 or 10 years. How do you shut that off? I struggle, I'll admit. Once you've gotten a sense for that, I think it is hard. Until you can, I think that's just what drives you to like just wiggle your way around until you find a way to get involved in a way that where you feel like you're contributing and getting some traction in that direction.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to hear from this spectrum of of attendees, because normally I don't get to interact. I get to interact with regulators and somebody like some from NASA or whatever, and then of course people building the new types of aircraft. But it's very interesting because, like I said, there are no right answers, there are no wrong answers. But it's interesting the notion of, well, if someone's going to do evil, we should leave them out. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's something that we do. Interesting with hackers, I guess. Hackers are often not invited to meetings on new types of innovations. But then everybody wants to listen to them because they kind of figured out how to innovate by themselves. But then it also reminds me that we do have some, especially I think after the nuclear age, when the nuclear age came, and then the question was, well, how many people should know how to use nuclear energy, and all of that discussion that was going around. And I think there was some people who are saying, well, you can never stop knowledge from getting into someone's mind, but you can definitely try and make sure that once it's in their mind, they do good things with it. And that's of course always a balance that every time it goes wrong, it makes the headlines. For generally though, apart from those people who have bad intentions, nobody, I think it's clear that we should never leave anyone out of the innovation space. And within the context of our discussion in this workshop that we give, it's pretty much to make sure that, let's realize as a group first that there should never be a case when somebody says, well, we shouldn't let the regulator know this, or we shouldn't let this academia know this, or we shouldn't let the innovator know this. Information is key, and it's always inclusive. Of course, sometimes there's some proprietary things that would just not work with the way that funding works sometimes. But apart from that, I mean, it's an inclusive space, and that's what we try to. Sometimes when we discuss a subject, the realization is made, I can call it a realization, that actually there's a flaw in this workshop. And that is that it seems to imply that regulators and academia are not innovators. And that's not true, right? So actually, when we talk about innovators meeting regulators and academia, regulators and academia are also, or can also, of course, be innovators. And so it's not meant to say that, oh, you cannot be an innovator because you're a regulator. But innovation really is all inclusive. There are always things that are missing, and what's missing is different from group to group, from person to person, or innovator to innovator. But what's interesting is that I think that two things come out of these discussions that seem to be thematic. One is that sometimes things are missing, but they already exist. It's just access that's missing. So whether it's that funding, or it's some equipment, or whatever it is that it exists somewhere on this planet. You just need to find better access or better distribution of the access to that system. But then there's this whole other area that has to do with social responsibility and all these other things that you've been talking about, which strangely isn't, and I might be wrong, I might have a blind spot here, but strangely it seems are not exposing themselves to the same innovation and the same methods of innovation as everyone else. I had a conversation earlier today where you gave a talk on regulation, and how regulations enable innovation, which is always counterintuitive for many people. But I won't redo that 20-minute talk here. But one thing that is interesting is that I see these maker spaces, and they're doing all sorts of creative things. And I see the slogan for the Fab Labs. I think it's or the original course in MIT that said something like make almost anything. Well, what if I want to make regulation? Right? Why is there no Fab Lab out there about how to create new ways of regulating? What if we want to do social responsibility as an innovative space? Why is there no Maker Lab on social responsibility? Or this the inclusive thing that was just spoken about, or even, a makers, can we have a Fab Lab that is themed on, or I know they don't have specific themes, but there is a corner in a Fab Lab that just says, how to innovate to yes, right? Like you just mentioned, but that's kind of what we want to get to. And if you get the same amount of creativity in getting those items discussed, maybe someone's going to think of something that no one else thought of before that makes sense for everybody. So I think when we do this workshop, that's kind of what we want. them to realize that they're actually all kind of innovators, and it's not exclusive. Everyone should have access, and there are definitely things missing. For the spare time, it's a trick question in that, what is spare time, right? Because if you do something that you love to do, every moment you're doing it is not spare time. It's actually what you want to do, right? You spend your spare time doing 9 to 5, really, right? That's what if you're not in a job that you want to, that is what you want to do, then you're just doing it for get money and all the security, then that's actually where you're spending the spare time. And it's just a shift in thinking a little bit, but definitely, you cannot switch off the mind, as it was just mentioned. You cannot tell someone else to switch off their mind, although that's been attempted. You have to understand that when we have, and in the community, usually you'd have a lot of passion with innovators, and you'd have a different kind of passion with regulators. And that's a mutual understanding that they need to get to make sure that they're building something together. So just a few quick slides that are not actually too relevant for this workshop, because I don't want to take time from these great discussions where I'm actually learning more than anyone else, I think, right now. But just so that we show you a few more of the slides. So first, we have the ecosystem, and we have everybody, research institutes, incubators, all this other stuff. And I think when we talk about the government role, and here's a little verbose, but basically governments, when I get pulled over by the police for speeding, I definitely do not enjoy the experience. I have a lot of natural aversion to the fact that I've been pulled over. But any logical, sane mind would make it clear that, of course, I'm very thankful that there is someone out there pulling over people who are speeding. Now, I think there's a lack of empathy, which is expressed sometimes on both sides. It's the same when I get to the border. I'm lucky I get to travel a lot, or at least I used to before COVID. And every time I get to the border, that I feel bad. I feel that I haven't been properly introduced to the person who has to decide whether they're going to let me into their country or not, because that person really is put in a situation where they have to do a job, and I understand and respect the job, but they are literally given a very minimum amount of information on which to do their job on, and then you're in or you're not in, and whatever the effect of that it has. So this word government and the regulatory part, there is something that needs to be reintroduced, I find, into society, about they're there for the protection of the public interest, and they are, of course, also in the international field. Of course, they're there to represent the interests of their country. And this is important when we have all of this technology coming online that is introduced not just in the domestic market, but in the international markets. Research institutions have this crucial role. I think it's growing. The more regulators don't understand technology, the more they have to rely on those who do, to tell the regulator, or give assurance to the regulator that it is able to do, perform the way that it's been advertised to perform. There is definitely parts of our world where industry might be a little bit better resourced or better positioned than the research institutes to provide that reassurance to the regulator. But inherently, the independent validation of something is very important. And there again, with the COVID situation, and always having the medical advice and scientists, whether their advice is acted on or not is a separate political issue, of course, but that the advice is given and that they feel independent in giving that advice. I think that is very modern in the innovation world. And when we see AI come on board, it's going to be probably accentuated a little more, because they're there was just no traditional way to understand AI behavior, but there is definitely ways to research and prove that it can or cannot meet certain human values. So incubators, accelerators, this is probably in aviation, one of the most important areas where these communities come together, because we see that the industry picks up good ideas, but they don't buy them. They don't say, okay, this is now bought over. They used to do that, and they still do it, but there are incubators, accelerators who support ideas that other people have, innovations that other people have. And the way they support the idea is not so much from the technical aspect. So we do have some major aviation manufacturing or industry players out there who will run a competition and pick the top 5 ideas, let's say, for putting in their incubator. And then they surround this team of innovators with business experts, regulatory experts, social experts, the things that the innovator themselves probably doesn't know, understand, or can engage with. And so that when that idea is matured through the incubation process, it ends up, if it survives that process, ends up as something that has regulatory compliance, social acceptance, and all of these things. Accelerators, to a certain degree, I think, are there as well. And it's different. It's a different model to the buyout model. It's a different model to the direct competition model, where unfortunately we have had some things in the history where somebody has a really good idea, or someone else suddenly comes up with something very similar, and then uses their market strength or maturity in regulatory and social processes to basically outcompete the other fellow. So I've kind of covered that and some. Startups and enterprises. I won't go over this slide too much, but basically, when we talk about people who have stopped being the kid who's just making stuff and fun and suddenly wants to, excuse the expression, get rich off of their idea, then startups are the traditional path that they will take. And it's important when we look at this from a regulatory perspective or a academic perspective to understand how they need to learn before they engage. And this is in our community of innovators. We have those innovators who try to get something to work, let's say a drone that delivers a package, and then they show up and to the regulator and then say, okay, so just tell me what I need done. Sorry, and then compare that to the startup that before they finish their product or even start some of their product, they already have either learned or procured the regulatory, the business knowledge, all of the things that they would need to know if they become a successful company. And that approach is very important. The distinction of those two approaches is very important because we don't want people to think that regulators are stopping innovation from happening just because somebody didn't, read the regulations before they started working on something. There are other players in the space, angel investors, venture capitalists, private equity firms. We don't cover that in our workshop, but they're still very important and cannot be missed, especially because a lot of them are going to need the same information as the academia and regulators about innovation. They will use it differently. They will plug the numbers into different formulas to see if they're going to invest or they're going to provide some sort of assistance, but yet they're kind of the same data points. So if you're talking about a new type of aircraft, then it's endurance, it's speed, it's all of this is data that's both needed to verify safety And it's also needed to see if there's market potential in it. The greater area now we're looking at is, development agencies, social, civic societies, and private companies. But here, I think it's one of the key things that I learned just a few months ago is that one of the experiences that one of the research agencies we're close to had with their own parliamentary system was, the parliamentarians, the politicians were telling the engineers, look, we probably don't need to know more about the engineering, but we need to know more about the social impact. And engineers, I'm an engineer, engineers like to solve problems, but we are not social. We don't necessarily know how to engage society always. And so it's an interesting thing that's happening in aviation, because traditionally aviation was segregated, right? I mean, if you went to the airport and then you got off whatever you came to the airport in, whether it was the bus or the taxi or the train, and then you went through a whole process that put you in an airplane, and the plane takes off, lands somewhere, and then it takes a whole process to take you out of the airplane and then drop you off in the curbside where you're going to be picked up. When we look at urban air mobility or advanced air mobility, like these animation behind me, this is completely different. You're going to be taking a taxi to what looks like a bus stop up on a skyscraper, and then wait for a plane, and then get on the plane. And when you have that kind of interaction with, no longer kind of segregated, then it's very important to talk to and to understand the urban community better, the rural community better, just like bus and trains have had to do for a while. And so in aviation, when it comes to innovation, it's important for there to be that engagement. So let me skip through some slides just so that we can come back to a conversation. And so this is a picture from, and I'm sorry, the source is not written here, but this is from a KPMG report. And what it does, I think the text might be a little bit too small, but what it does is it shows what they call the disruption radar. And so on the right side, on the x-axis, on the right side, towards the right side are the old technologies. So you see there like hub to hub for aviation. You see a little bit of, the older types of turboprops and things like that. And then on the left side on the x-axis is the future stuff. So all the way on the left is quantum computing. And then somewhere a little bit in the middle left is electric aircraft. And then right in the center are these things that are coming online. What what we use this during the workshop is, how we use it during workshop is that when you think of regulations, that we put those regulations in place to take care of the stuff that exists or has existed. So the right side of this graph. And we need to have regulations for the left side of the graph. But often the left side of the graph has to somehow find its way to be regulated through the regulations that was written for the older stuff, the right side of the graph. And a lot of times, in fact, regulations is iterative. So we start with what we know, and then we try to figure out, well, what extra do we have to do? Innovation's coming in at such a pace and is so different that this evolutionary step, this small step process is probably not going to be enough. So the question then becomes, well, what can we do to make regulators more aware and more supportive, let's say, of where society wants to go with innovation? So that really is the last discussion point, and it's not a question on a slide, it's more for us to discuss as a group. And so if you, and here we don't have any regulators, so we'll ask the question specifically about regulators. So what do you think regulators should do what should they do in the future that they're not doing today, or that you don't know that they're doing today, so that they can both protect the public interest on all the innovations that are happening, but also not hold up the innovations, especially those that are going to be beneficial to society. So what do you feel how do you feel the regulator needs to improve? And Kumar, I know it's getting very late in your part of the world, so you can go first, and then we'll follow everyone else. So Kumar, please, what do you think how do you think the regulator should improve?
I guess I think it should be more like involving more people in the decision making process, right? Like you need to have, when the regulators make those decisions, so like what policies have to be brought to light. Uh, you don't have the say of the common people, right? Like the one who will be actually using it, and they like we never have a say of what like suppose a government proposes to like have something being built in a city or in a place, right? You I don't know, like it's never there, like you people like citizens can go up and like try to go for a debate, or like that something should be done, or like or any like thoughts from us, right? So I think those places has to be there, like those spaces like where citizen can speak up, people can come speak, people of the community who are like for whom the regulations are being bought, they can speak up and like they like discuss about, at least like share their thoughts on this, and then a decision like it should be made, right? I guess that's it.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's definitely a solvable suggestion. I mean, it's an implementable suggestion. Thank you. Shana, please.
I'm sorry, a message came in. The question, remind me, sorry.
Oh, no problem. So how do you think regulators should improve to better enable innovations, but also, protect the public, but don't hold things back? What should they do differently? For example, you were giving, I think you mentioned.
I think this shared visioning space can serve, right? Like I think because sometimes we're having a hard time seeing together, right? We're having a hard time identifying where the most promising frontiers are. We're having maybe a hard time hearing each other, and other people who might be able to contribute could maybe break that. I think it's, it probably depends on the environment too, right? So regulators in aviation are going to be different than, let's say, regulators in education. And if all of your educational regulators are a generation old, right? Like we have to update our regulatory system, sort of, right? Like,
I think you had mentioned before that your child had been working on something, but not the regulator, but
robotics or whatever.
Yeah, robotics.
Right. And I was like, well, actually, you kind of wanted to, you didn't know what to say. Like I'm sitting at a table with a superintendent of our school district who fit the description of what I just said, sort of. And you've walked through the school and you've seen 16-year-old young men learning how to flip quesadillas. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And there are drug problems in the school. And you're like, oh, actually, there's a whole established system of networks throughout the country known as Lego First. that's in, you know, that are cultivating this for whoever wants to jump in. And why am I subject to you as my regulator?
Mhm.
Is that just regulation? Is it, am I required to be subject to this? And why? Okay, just some provocations, I guess. Right?
No,
Like,
yeah.
well, how was so, and then I'm hearing about the X district on these innovation channels in these schools where like kids are building, you know,
Mm.
I don't know, movable platforms in the dining hall to like sit on in a play fort while they have their lunch. You know what I mean? Like, and you're kind of like, huh, you
Mm.
know, or you think about, or how do you make space for the regulator who might feel really, you know, how do these things to coexist, say? So there's the people who want more perfected AP exams, while there's also those who need to be ensuring that, you know, musicians are appropriately cultivated, right?
Mhm.
In a diverse ecosystem, how do you put in place new ways of regulating to cultivate and honor the diversity and make room for varied kinds of organisms and pathways to mutually coexist and thrive that might be very different, and perhaps one regulator is perfectly suited for one environment and not for another, right? Like
Mhm.
there's all this complexity, I think, to be appreciated and perhaps brought to the surface around these kinds of things now.
Okay. Yeah, I think it fits in with what Kumar said. I think about you know, being able to talk and be part of the process that
Yeah.
leads to regulation, so
Right.
that it's informed.
Yeah. What's the purpose of the regulation, right? Like, so some people think of regulation as like holding something back, right? Is it like, how do we ease up on the constraints as people learn to self-govern appropriately and to find their place and to be aligned with each other? Like we can open up the constraints, right? The tighter governance needs to happen when it needs to be held for whatever reason, right? As you kind of learn to navigate and live in new ways, we can open up and make more room for more, perhaps.
Richard, I see you're not in your car anymore.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. 4 and 4, 4, 5
Okay.
and 5. Sorry.
All right. This is a very iffy connection. It's gone up and down over the last few minutes. So if it dies, I'll just stop and please just go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Got my little notes here. This discussion reminded me of a consulting assignment I had with the Federal Trade Commission back in the day. In the early 90s, they hired me to help them think through which department should control the web server. Right? They were just getting into the internet, and there was like a little internal kerfuffle, you know, between the IT department and the communications. You know, department, which was, you know, who was more senior to who and who should be controlling, you know, the flow of content and stuff like that. So for some reason, they hired me to help them try to figure that out. And that went on for a year or so. And I learned a lot about the institutional culture of the Federal Trade Commission, which goes back to the Roosevelt, you know, years. And they really tried to sort of impress on me that they were kind of an academic, collegial, culture. They didn't really see themselves as enforcers. That was sort of like the final straw, right? You know, an enforcement action was kind of like a sign of failure, you know, for them. Like we got something wrong. We had to pull somebody's plug. They didn't want to do that. And so they kind of had sort of an institutional culture of curiosity, right? When they would learn about some kind of a product issue or something like that, they weren't
necessarily being proactive, looking out. Like a lot of regulators, they can only respond to complaints. They just don't have the time or the resources, right? So that's how they learn that there's an issue out there. People will tell them. And a lot of their goals seem to be, first of all, as problem solvers. They saw themselves as being able to actually help to improve the market, to expand the market by improving information between consumers and producers. So to the extent a regulatory authority could create a little bit more transparency between the product and the buyer, it would increase trust on the part of the consumer, of the buyer, and thus lower their risk, right? Thus increasing the likelihood of them making a buying decision, right? And one way of lowering that risk was knowing the consumer knew that they could pick up the phone and call a trusted, third-party government, official with the potential for regulatory action, and say, hey, this widget doesn't work, right?
Mm.
So the buyer not knowing that they have recourse like that lowers their decision-making risk to take a chance and purchase the product, thus expanding the market, and that's good for the economy. So they were kind of looking for that third way to kind of thread that kind of a needle when it became clear to them, and they determined that a regulatory action was they needed to what's the term, promulgate a new regulation. And although they were cops, they had enforcement capabilities. That was like the last step that they ever wanted to take, both politically but also practically. And they sort of saw that as a sign of failure in the system. And so then they tried to fix that. What do we need to do so that we don't get faced with the need for an enforcement action in the future? And I just thought that was a pretty intelligent way to think about what a regulatory agency's mission ought to be. They were one of the first ones. They had 70 years to kind of hash that through. And they used to tell it, there was a joke inside. There's a very famous statue outside of the FTC building in Washington, D.C. It was built during the Roosevelt administration. So it's like this big, naked, beefy guy, reigning, it's at 9 feet, and it's called Man Taming the Market is the title of the statue, and it's or restraint of trade. Take your pick. So as in, either we're kind of like pulling the market in, or we're actually restraining trade and closing things off, and that is sort of the the needle that we have to thread. Interesting outfit, but I always thought that sort of that institutional culture of curiosity and problem solving as being first and foremost over kind of reaction and enforcement as being sort of the institutional mission had some real wisdom to it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, an interesting statue. Kate.
I just thought maybe there would be a good, I don't know how this would be, but maybe like how do you say, like a trial period, in which, if you can trial this and see how it works and kind of iterate the process in the market and in the real world, and then understand through that process exactly what's working, what's not. So like a trial feedback process, entry to market kind of space.
Yeah, they do have these things called the sandboxes that try to do that. I think, and with this question, it's always very similar answers with one underlying loud theme, which is, it has to be a more inclusive process that involves everybody, not just the innovator who is trying to get something to market, but also the users who are going to be using it, and then also those who are going to live with the consequences of bad regulation. Because a lot of times I think people feel that if they don't get their case or their information into the process at the right time, then people start pouring concrete all over regulations, and then it becomes very difficult to convince the regulatory framework that maybe there was an unintended consequence to everything. And so it's got to be that iterative process that Kate just mentioned as well, which helps accept the fact that all things are imperfect, and so there's got to be a healthy way to get them to become less imperfect. But with that, again, we don't have any regulators on this call per se. I'm an international regulator to a certain degree, but I'm not a national regulator, so I don't actually write regulations. But if they were there, then of course we would give them the opportunity to answer this question as well. So it has now been 2 hours, and I am at the end of my presentation. I was hoping to be able to show you something else, but I think there was an earlier session today on regulation as an enabler. So if you have a little time, then once the link is put on, I do encourage you to look at it. Although I do apologize that you won't be able to debate me on any of the things that I say in that video, since it's been recorded. But for sure, if you want to stay, I think this is a beginning of a conversation, and I hope it does carry some momentum within your own circles and lead to a greater, international forum on this type of subject. And then maybe at the next Fab City, we can talk about what was done from the information we heard today. That would be a concrete follow-up to what we spoke, where somebody might say, well, I took that information and I created, I don't know, a makerspace for social acceptance or something like that. So thank you very much to everybody for joining this call. And if anybody would like to say a few words at the end, please take the mic.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I left my email on the chat, yfattah@icao.int. But you can also get it through the, I believe, the Fab Lab website. And
yeah, you can